So the third topic that we want to discuss today is the use of online surveys and A/B testing. As I see it, there are basically two main options for running A/B tests. The first is that you can actually just launch your content directly and see how it does sort of in the wild. So for example, you can place Facebook ads that test two different variations of the same message. And the benefit of doing this is that users will not be aware that they're in an experiment, so they will just see an ad and they won't know that there's an alternative version of it. And in that sense, they will interact naturally with the content, so they would choose whether they want to view it or click on it without, again, being aware that they're engaging in some sort of research. The second alternative is that you could actually run a survey, and on the survey you could test different variations of the content and directly ask users about their behavior or their preferences. So historically, a lot of researchers using online tools have used Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a platform through which you can sort of hire task workers to complete a task, such as a survey. Increasingly now, a lot of researchers are also just placing their surveys as ads on Facebook and recruiting people through that channel. So some of the benefits of this approach are that you can have your respondents, directly stating their preferences about content. So you can ask them about two versions of the message and which one they like best. We can also have respondents generating content. So for example, we can ask them to come up with messages encouraging others to respect social distancing or follow COVID-19 guidelines. We can even ask respondents to sort of flag content on their own. So we could ask for examples of misinformation that they've seen in their timeline or rumors that they've heard from their neighbors. And then finally, again, we can sort of have respondents sort of participate in experiments, ask them about hypothetical options and which choice they would make under different settings. The other benefit of this approach is that we can then add additional survey questions to really gather information about who these respondents are. We can ask about how others in their community behave, who they trust, where they get their information, and why they might or might not choose to take an action. So rather than just observing what they do, we can try to understand why they're doing it in a particular way. When planning an A/B test, there are a couple different questions that you might want to ask yourself. So the first is really what content you want to test. What are the variations that you're interested in? So you may want to test, different images or layout or graphic design about how your message looks. You might want to test the message itself or the text or the framing of it, maybe the language that it's in or the tone that it takes, maybe the source of the message, so who is actually providing the information. You might want to experiment with different calls to action, such as asking people to share or asking people to read or click on something, and then even experiment with different incentives for action or different motives for action. You also want to think about who is your target population. So many of these platforms allow you to reach a very specific subset of respondents. So you can target people in specific geographies with specific age or gender attributes, and you might even be able to target specific groups such as healthcare workers. You also want to think a little bit about how you're going to be recruiting people into the study and randomizing them. So again, you want to think about the platform that you're going to use to advertise your surveys or gather respondents. You want to think about if there's any incentive to participate in your survey. So you might want to give free airtime or a small cash benefit. You want to think about how you're going to assign your respondents into different treatment groups. And then also what factors could jeopardize the integrity of your treatments. So for example, you may have some respondents who drop out or who lose interest in the study, and this might not be the same, depending on which treatment they're receiving. Some respondents might even try to switch treatment groups. So if one treatment group looks better than the other, one social media campaign looks better than the other, they may try to figure out how they could wind up in a different group. And then finally, you can have the case in which respondents in one treatment group affect another. So particularly on social media, if you're asking people to share content, it's possible that their friends and their neighbors are also receiving that content from them. And if you try to reach those friends and neighbors directly, they've already been exposed to your message in one form or another. So next, I'm going to hand over the mic to a guest speaker, Francesco Rampazzo, who is a postdoc at Oxford University who's been using Facebook to recruit respondents for a COVID-19 health behavior survey.
I will now briefly introduce the COVID-19 Health Behavior Survey. The CHBS is a web-based survey that focuses on people's reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic and targets individuals aged over 18 years old. We use Facebook as a recruitment tool to address the challenge to quickly administer a questionnaire during the COVID-19 pandemic. The questionnaire was advertised as an ad on the timeline of the Facebook users targeted. The questionnaire included topics such as social demographic characteristics of the respondents, but we also asked about their health, behaviors, attitudes, and contacts during the pandemic. We targeted several European countries and the United States. The study started in the middle of March, and we recruited respondents until the middle of August. We collected more than 144,000 completed questionnaires. We thought of three main advantages of running this type of surveys on Facebook. First, we were able to design, implement, and launch the survey in a timely manner. Secondly, Facebook enables us to draw multinational samples from diverse parts of the respective national populations. Third, the recruitment on Facebook was comparatively cost-effective. In the figure, we show how a campaign was created and stratified by user sex, age group, and the region of residence. Unfortunately, there are also challenges to run a survey on Facebook. The most important challenge relates to the issue self-selection bias. Not all demographic groups are equally well represented on Facebook. In addition, there may be variation in Facebook users' interest in the survey topic. This issue is potentially worsened by the algorithm optimization that Facebook uses for delivering the ads. If certain groups are more likely to click on an ad than others, Facebook might increasingly deliver the ads to these groups, therefore reinforcing the existing self-selection bias despite the stratification of the targeting. In our ads, we use 6 different figures to target respondents that you can see on this slide. On the second figure in this slide, you can see a bar plot that shows how the majority of our respondents actually came from figure number 5, woman wearing a mask, which actually portray a woman holding a sign with the message "Stop and Cough." Another challenge relates to trust in web-based survey. We addressed this issue by highlighting that the survey was anonymous and that no personal information was exchanged with Facebook. We also provided additional information about our research institute, the research team, and the goals of our survey by providing a link to our data protection policy and providing information about the preliminary results and reports as they become available. The advertisement and the study page needed to be actively managed to respond to questions raised by the targeted Facebook users. To sum up, Facebook targeted ads can be used to recruit survey respondents, but it is really important to consider self-selection bias and to create trust with the respondents. You can find some references to this project in these papers that are listed in this slide. The CHBS team is made up by Daniela Perrotta, Andre Grove, Jorge Cimentada, Emanuele Del Fava, myself, Sofia Gil Cleves, and Emilio Zaghini, and we were supported by the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research.
Hi everyone, I'm Leah Rosenzweig. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University, and I'm a political scientist by training. And today I'm going to talk to you about a couple collaborations that I've been involved in around understanding health attitudes, behaviors, and stopping the spread of COVID-19 misinformation. So the data that I'm showing here first, we were interested in understanding what is the right message to get people to increase their willingness to be vaccinated in particular. And these data come from a phone survey of 300 randomly sampled respondents living in Lagos, Nigeria. And so the way we did this is using what's called a framing experiment, where part of the respondents were randomly assigned to a control condition that just got the standard question about how willing you would be to vaccinate your kids at this time, while other respondents got different sorts of frames or primes. So this first frame thought about law and order, priming people to think about how the government has been working hard to keep the public healthy by making sure people who endanger public health are caught. Another frame was about identity, sort of getting people to think about the shared identity as Lagosians and the responsibility to keep all of Lagos healthy. And then finally was a public goods frame, saying the government has been working hard to respond to the health needs of the public. And so after each of these frames, all respondents would be asked the control question. And so here what we're showing you is responses on this unwillingness to very willing scale. And compared to the control, we can see that both the identity prime and the public good prime increase respondents' stated willingness to be vaccinated or to vaccinate their kids compared to the control. So in this case, among this sample in Lagos, Nigeria, these kinds of frames seem to be doing well and doing better than the control and the law and order frame in terms of encouraging people to be willing to vaccinate their kids. Now, this was done over the phone, but you could easily think about implementing this in an online experiment as well. So a related question is, once you have the right message, who is the right messenger for these public health messages? So here, these data come from a nationally representative phone survey from Sierra Leone, where we wanted to understand who's the right messenger to try and get citizens to keep a distance of 2 meters from people outside of their household. So what we did is that we asked this question, but respondents were randomized to see one of 4 different actors suggesting that this was a good thing to do. So respondents might have been randomized to see or to be asked, government officials say that citizens should always maintain a distance, and then they would be asked if they agree or disagree with this suggestion. And so we selected these 4 different actors in collaboration with our partners in the government of Sierra Leone and a civil society organization, both because these were actors at the time who were suggesting and saying this message actually in the real world, and because the government would be able to enlist these kinds of people to help them get this message out if, in fact, we found, for instance, that religious leaders were quite good at getting people's agreement with this kind of policy. So what we found is that actually overall, the experts at the WHO performed particularly well across the whole sample. So compared to the WHO, central government leaders, the message about 2 meters distance coming from them actually sort of has a lower level of agreement. Same with local government leaders, specifically the local council and religious leaders. But here, we're looking at aggregate data for the whole country. And, if you're a policymaker, you probably want to understand who among citizens in particular areas, whether that's certain geographic areas or urban, rural, is this the same across the board that we should send this kind of message from the WHO all the time? Or are there particular people, perhaps, that should see the message coming from the WHO or from a different actor? So one way to look at this that we did is by partisanship. So here we're looking at ruling party or SLPP partisans in Sierra Leone in the light blue, and the purple are non-ruling party supporters, so opposition party supporters and non-partisans. And what you can see is that in the light blue, the ruling party supporters, they're quite, horizontal or flat across, so it actually doesn't seem to make a big difference who the messenger is with respect to this particular message for SLPP supporters. But as you can see, when we look at the purple bars, actually the WHO does much better compared to the central government, perhaps not surprisingly, among these opposition supporters or nonpartisans. So this is just to say that you might want to think about what's the right message, who's the right messenger, but then think about heterogeneity that you might explore and be interested in, whether that's geographic, based on partisanship, which might be a proxy for trust in government, things like that. And we've also found in these data that it is, we ran this kind of experiment with other questions, so not about 2 meters distance, but about mask wearing, and we find different results. So that's all to say that it's important to think about who the messenger is with respect to a particular message and testing these interactions. And again, this would be easy to implement in an online setting. So finally, the last study I'm going to talk about is something we did run online, where we asked, can we reduce the spread of COVID-19 misinformation? And so here we used Facebook advertisements targeting citizens living in Nigeria and in Kenya who were 18 years and older. And once they clicked on an ad, which offered to take a survey in exchange for airtime, they were sent to a Facebook chatbot messenger. And there's a lot of tools out there now to let you program your own chatbot. So we use ChatFuel, but there are other softwares out there as well. And so this video just shows you briefly what it looks like, how the respondent sort of interacts with the survey, which might be sort of more engaging and more exciting than if the ad sent them to a Qualtrics survey or to a Google form. And so here, what we were interested in mostly is understanding sharing intention. So can we reduce people saying that they want to share pieces of misinformation on their timeline or to a friend on Messenger. So the flow of the survey was, first we asked people about their sort of demographics, age, gender, education. They then saw 2 headlines, or what we call stimuli, that were true and 2 that were false in a random order. And again, these were concerning COVID-19 best practices were the true information, and then these sort of false cures were the false. And respondents were randomized to receive both respondent level treatments, but also headline level treatments. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. And then at the end, our sort of outcome of interest again is these sharing intentions. So in terms of respondent level treatments, here I'm showing you 2 out of, I think, the 7 or so that we randomized and tested. One is an accuracy nudge that comes from Pennycook et al. 2020, which just understands whether or not, if we sort of get people to think about whether an unrelated to COVID headline is true or false, if that sort of nudge towards accuracy carries over into our COVID related stimuli. And our initial findings suggest that it is actually effective at getting people to lower the amount of misinformation pieces that they're sharing. And the other respondent level treatment is these Facebook tips. So we showed people 5 tips coming from Facebook in terms of how you can identify misinformation online. The headline level treatments were to mirror what many social media companies are doing at the moment, which is including these kinds of fact checks or disputed flags on pieces of misinformation. So here, this fact check you can see is disputed by third-party fact checkers. This real info headline level treatment is something we came up with, which is just providing real information on top of this piece of misinformation. And then finally, for the true stimuli, there would be no flag for the headline level treatments. You would just get the stimuli and then asked if you wanted to share it or not. And so what we did is we crossed these respondent level and headline level treatments so that respondents could get both or neither or one of different kinds. And the data on this is pending, but so far it looks promising. So it was just to share the idea of this kind of experimental setup. But I just want to quickly conclude with some ethical considerations when studying misinformation. So the first is ensuring that we're not contributing to the misinformation ecosystem. So what that means is, on the one hand, not creating new false stimuli. And so for this study, we gathered our stimuli, both true and false, among a set of headlines and pieces of information that have actually been shared already online. And this is one resource for getting these kinds of misinformation by any country in the world. The second is not allowing respondents to actually share the false content and to spread misinformation. So we asked about sharing intentions because at the end of the survey, we provided resources and true information to respondents. We debriefed them about what pieces of information they saw were actually true and were actually false. And while we allowed them to share the true pieces of information, we did not allow them to actually share the false stimuli. So I hope that's helpful. Thanks for listening.
So in conclusion, today we've sort of reviewed 3 key topics surrounding the use of computational social science and AI for analyzing misinformation. The first was social media listening through automated AI tools. The second was radio monitoring. And then the third has been online surveys and A/B testing. We wanted to finish with a brief discussion of how to get the most out of working with data scientists. Assuming that you have been sort of inspired by these topics and you have ideas of how they could be applied to your own projects, it's likely that you'll partner with a data scientist or some sort of technical partner who will help produce the content and the analysis that you're interested in. And so we, from our own lessons learned, wanted to provide a bit of advice on how to make this relationship productive. So the first starting point, I think, for any discussion is really to identify a clear research question about what you want to learn. In particular, you want to identify the scope of the problem. What is the specific topic that you're interested in studying, and what people are you interested in studying? So which demographics or which populations are most important to you? And I would recommend that you prepare examples of the type of content that you're interested in. So for example, you might curate a collection of tweets that would be helpful for you to have flagged automatically. Or you might try to find some radio stations and clips from those radio stations that you wish you had heard and been able to analyze in real time. You want to think about your particular use case and focus on how the findings or the results of the project will affect decision making. So once you've completed this successfully and you have this analysis, what is this going to change about your operations? In that sense, also it's helpful to identify a deliverable. So thinking about how the results can be presented so that they're most useful for you and your organization. And you might even be specific, saying that you want a concept note or a PowerPoint or a dashboard of some kind. Then again, to try to keep things concrete, it's helpful to identify a time frame of when you'll need the analysis by, or some intermediate deadlines that you can use to keep the process on track. And then also a clear definition of success and failure. So what does a win look like? Does it mean that you've identified a rumor before analysts on the ground have found it independently? Does it mean that you're able to sort of quantify the extent to which your viral campaign has been spread on social media? Thinking about really what is a success for you and what would be considered a failure of the project. Once you've sort of done this project scoping phase, then we sort of see a second phase of iteration and change. So really entering the project, you want to be committed to a flexible code design. You want to expect that you're going to provide feedback to your data science partner and adapt the goals of the project together as you provide this feedback. One thing that's useful in that process is to iterate and to approach the process like an engineer, in the sense that you want to build a simple prototype and then have that fail quickly and then repeat until you get a better and better product. So not wait a long time to have a final product, but really give feedback on the intermediate stages. We also recommend that you sort of accept the limitations of many of these data science tools. So these new methods are not going to solve all of your old problems, and we should enter these projects expecting that there are certain tasks that they're very good at and other tasks that they just can't achieve very well. And in that sense, you want to sort of be asking about the weaknesses of these tools. You want to ask when they fail, or particularly, for a given data set or algorithm, you want to ask what are some of the biases that you might encounter that might shape the type of information and analysis that you're getting in return. Globally, I guess I find it helpful to really think about, short run versus long run approaches to the problem. In the short run, I recommend that you try to solve a very small problem with a very narrow goal. And then in the long run, you can both improve that solution and then expand the scope of the solution. So given this sort of general advice, we hope that this training has been useful both for showing you some of the directions that you could take in your own work, and then sort of preparing you to engage in this process yourself. I know Global Pulse is always happy to work with new partners and new projects, so feel free, please, to reach out to us if there are particular questions or ideas that you have that you would like to discuss further. Throughout the presentation, we've also included, as you can see in the slide, some links to additional reading or additional resources. I'm just going to end now by paging through quickly 2 more pages of resources that you can use that may provide some helpful links if you want to do further investigation. Thank you again for your time. We're so excited that you're interested in this topic, and we hope that we've been able to provide a useful resource to you as you continue to learn and improve your work. Thank you.